I would say, sadly, unlike India, which is still to completely immerse itself in submarine warfare. The Chinese have done it. They've understood that the future of the current, the past, the future of naval warfare has to be as far as submarines are concerned. It can't be with aircraft carriers. Yeah. If 50 Chinese soldiers come into your camp and refuse to go back, are you going to sit there and let them sit there, or are you going to, let a few punches fly, right? A, that. B, when patrols cross each other, shouting slogans at each other, waving flags at each other, that whole war display and battle display and machismo is all totally normal. But if someone throws a rock, then you've got a problem. Galwan, by the way, the entire Galwan clash started because someone threw a rock. One rock was thrown and it hit Colonel Santosh Babu, the commanding officer of 16 Bihar, and that's what led to that huge bloodletting that took place.
Hello and welcome. 10th episode of Inner Defense. Shiv, we've been doing this for 2 months and a half now. How are you liking your podcast experience is what I'll start with.
I'm totally loving it because it's opened up a completely new audience which I didn't know about before. So I keep getting messages all the time. And what I really love is I'm on many different defense groups, they've here and abroad. And recently on my Israel group, group with war reporters and stuff, I saw 2 of our podcasts being circulated over there. So people are listening, people are watching.
Nice, lovely. So what do we want to talk about this week? Nothing much is happening in the world of defense. And honestly speaking, I think nothing much will happen for the next few months, news-wise speaking, because it's all going to be elections.
Yeah.
But let's talk about China. The first episode that we did, we kind of took an overview look at all the
wars,
sort of conflicts that are happening in the world right now. Israel, like you mentioned, Russia, Ukraine, and China. But let's dive a little bit deeper into China. I want to begin with like sort of a bigger picture on what's happening from somebody who obviously talks to people in the defense establishment. Because I'll tell you something, the army chief recently gave an interview, I think the annual interview that he gives out, in which once again he said that the situation on the LAC along with China is stable but sensitive. I've been hearing this for a while now.
4 years.
For lay people, it's like, ho gaya, the Galwan clash happened and it's all done and dusted and it's all done. But army chiefs, military chiefs have been constantly saying that the situation remains sensitive. Why do they say that, and what's exactly going on right now before we go into what's happening?
The reason why the army chiefs correctly say that the situation remains sensitive, Dave, is because you've got the 2 world's largest armies who've massed upwards of 50,000 troops on each side within visual distance of each other, along a frontier in eastern Ladakh still. And these are not just troops, but these are regiments with tanks, with artillery, with rocket systems, with radars, basically warfighting units that are primed and ready for assault and for defense, right? So when they say when the army chief says it's stable but sensitive, it is actually stable, because when you have 2 sort of equal forces applying towards each other, nothing moves and it becomes stable, right? So that's the reason why he says it's stable, and he's right. Since I think somewhere around early 2022, which is when the last disengagement happened at one of the friction points. I think it was Hot Springs or the Gogra post in eastern Ladakh. There has been practically no movement there. And when I say no movement, I mean no offensive movement on either side, no aggressive movements. But that doesn't mean that China hasn't been building up its capacity on that side. They've been building infrastructure at a furious rate. Ironically, the story you'll never hear is how India is building infrastructure at a furious rate as well. As a result of the political climate, you'll constantly hear about how China has taken territory. I'm sure we'll get into that in just a bit, Dave. But the situation is most certainly still sensitive because at this stage, we are now 4 years into the world's biggest ever world's biggest military standoff, right? 2 nuclear countries massed with their armies against each other at the snow-blown, super high altitudes of Ladakh. They've collided in Galwan. There have been clashes taking place on the Pangong Lake. There have been some violent confrontations between the two sides, but no all-out conflict has broken out. Thankfully for that, between the two sides. However, that possibility is never too far away. When you've got huge regiments and large masses of men at arms massed against each other in this way, war is never going to be really far away. However, the good news, of course, is that this kind of frozen situation, as it were, literally and metaphorically, also means that India's whole attempt at getting things to move back to the pre-May 2020 positions where China moves back its forces hasn't happened. They've basically said, we're at your doorstep and now we're going to build all this infrastructure and we're going to be here to stay. So this is their side of the line is, of course, China occupied Tibet, Aksai Chin, which is ours, etc., etc. But the fact remains that, does this become the new normal? Does this become the new status quo? That's the bad part. And here in our defense on this podcast, we don't do any chest thumping. We lay down the facts as they are, and let me say it very, very clearly. The politicians and the parties may fight endlessly about whether territory has been lost or territory has been recovered, etc. But the very fact that China continues to sit on our doorstep in eastern Ladakh, with increasing signs that it has no plans to leave, is in itself a bad situation for India. Okay. So whether it comes to territory or whether it comes to the bean count of how many square kilometers has gone this side, that side, because quite frankly, as a result of the differences in perception of the line of actual control, it's a bit of a meaningless exercise actually talking about which territory is where, because of the huge swaths of territory that actually account for the no man's land post what happened in Galwan. But the fact that the Chinese are there, let's make no mistake, this is not an equal situation by any measure. We may have taught the Chinese a lesson in terms of showing them that we are no pushover and we will defend, and that we can give them a very, very bloody nose like we did in Galwan. The fact is that it's they who are at our doorstep, not the other way around. Yeah. And that's why it's a bad situation for India.
Yeah. That's a very, very good explanation, I think, actually. And to just give a bit of a context to our listeners and viewers, unlike the LOC does not exist, technically speaking. Yeah. The LOC, if you see maps of India in popular culture, you just Google it, you'll see it. There's a line that, kind of goes around Jammu and Kashmir and demarcates what's Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and what's with India. But the LSC, when it comes to the military engagements, no one agrees where the LSC is. The Chinese say this is our LSC, the Indians say this is our LSC. And that is why what Shiv said right now, that the difference in perception, because of which you cannot do that counting of how many square kilometers of land have you lost, because you cannot just say you have lost that land because China says that's not ours and India says that's yours.
Exactly.
India says that's ours. And
it's China always been claim versus counterclaim because of the two lines.
Yeah. There was a point you touched upon. I was gonna go into that later on, but actually, because you said that in what you in the explanation earlier, I just want to go to that right now before we talk about other things. Is about how in the popular media we never talk about what India is doing, and I want to talk about that in context of recent reports of Chinese so-called spy ships. For listeners who are not watching us, I have just made air quotes, spy ships being in and around the Indian Ocean. I'm very conflicted about this. Several strands of thoughts, but first off, what are spy ships? Because I'm pretty sure every country has some sort of a vehicle that goes around researching the ocean bed. I'm pretty sure India does, but we never talk about that.
Yeah.
Why don't we do about that? And second, the laws don't forbid China from having the spy ships or the research going around. So what's the big deal? Why do we make
so the Chinese? You're right. Nothing stops the Chinese from using such ships in open waters, international waters. Within India's economic zone, obviously that's a separate matter. The problem with the Chinese, Dave, like with most things, is that as far as their strategic objectives, their military objectives are concerned, they are possibly the world's most untrustworthy country. Okay. if not the most untrustworthy country. Now, this is a country that serves its own purposes, so we can't fault them on that. They are, they're following their national agenda, and they're doing it actually in a pretty efficient and ruthless manner. So, credit to China for that. But they are a country that, in this sort of thing, in terms of espionage, in terms of deviously trying to sidestep international rules and regulations of the sea, etc. This is a country that does not follow the rules. It is extremely devious and unreliable and untrustworthy. Now, China has in the past sent hydrographic survey ships, research vessels, as they're so called, which I love that innocuous name, research vessels, in and around the Andaman Sea. I remember there was an incident where a Chinese oceanographic research vessel had been spotted off the Andaman Islands. Now, the word spy ship is a little dodgy as far as I'm concerned, because the essence of anything that is doing any spying is that it is kind of invisible. You can't really see it. You don't know what it's doing. In this case, it's like this huge 20,000-ton ship, right? So it's not exactly invisible. It's right there. You know exactly what's going on. The where the spying aspect comes into it is where you say the ship is actually a research vessel, but it's actually doing something else. Okay, now oceanographic surveys and research in the oceans may sound like a pretty routine kind of process, but it's actually not, Dev. Okay, hydrographic surveys of oceans are a very, very crucial instrument of giving your military, especially your submarine forces, the ability to map the oceans, the ability to, I'll come to the mapping part in just a bit. Let's just handle the spy ship part. So what the Chinese have been doing for many, many years now is they've been sending these survey missions or these research vessel missions into the Indian Ocean. They are allowed to send their ships whenever they want to. They can in international waters. They've been doing so. They've sent one just now to the Maldives as well, a so-called research vessel. India has had a clear strategic setback as far as Maldives is concerned. They want our military out from there and the Chinese in. That's their politics. It'll go in cycles. I'm sure India will be back there very soon. But the fact is that these vessels that the Chinese send into the Indian Ocean, they spend a large amount of time there harvesting huge amounts of data about the seabed. The Indian Ocean is obviously a vast ocean, right? What the Chinese don't have right now is what the Indian Navy and the Indian forces have, which is like a very good idea of what the Indian Ocean actually looks like. Okay. Which means in terms of depths, which it means in terms of water density, and I'll explain why these things are important. In terms of water temperatures, how these depths are actually changing as a result of climate change. These are hugely important, especially for a country like China, because they want to send their submarines into the Indian Ocean. They want control of the Indian Ocean, because the Indian Ocean has been established as the world's chief sea lanes of communication for trade. It's where most countries' energy security depends, because from the Middle East, West Asia, through the Suez Canal going into the Mediterranean Sea. From the Mediterranean Sea, everything comes into the Persian Gulf and then into the Indian Ocean. So this is where it's at as far as trade and energy security is concerned. So therefore, China doesn't want anyone else to be able to control that. And they do believe that their hegemony, their challenge to the United States, superiority can only come if it has a handle over trade and commerce and energy security and things like that. And it cannot do that unless it has total control over the Indian Ocean. And it cannot have total control over the Indian Ocean unless it knows the Indian Ocean. And it cannot know the Indian Ocean unless it is able to send submarines into the Indian Ocean at will. And it cannot send submarines into the Indian Ocean at will, especially nuclear-powered submarines, unless it has a very, very detailed, map of the Indian Ocean in terms of depth, in terms of water density, in terms of water temperatures, basically giving its submarine force this vast playground to play with. One might think that how difficult can it be? You just send submarines in, I'm sure the submarine commander already knows ki kya depth hai, kya depth nahi hai, where the things are. Most people, I think I'd like to just for 5 seconds, Dave, just go back into one little fundamental. Most people, I imagine, are tempted to think of the seabed as one kind of limitless flat surface, right? Just one featureless flat surface with some gentle ups and downs. What most people don't know is that the bottom of the sea is actually more dramatic, more cavernous, with ravines and mountains and caves and things like that, than land. It's much, and it's constantly changing because of the ocean currents. Things are actually constantly changing. So the depth of one part of the sea may have been 3,000 meters 1 year, and 10 years later it may be 2,000 meters because the ground has sedimented and come up, whatever. So all those, that's where hydrographic surveys actually come in. These survey ships and these research ships are constantly providing this detailed dynamic picture of the seabed, and those are priceless pieces of information for a country like China, even a country like India, because it's giving you like this ever-changing map that you're constantly updating on a yearly basis. That's why you need to keep sending these ships. And that's why those ships spend months at sea, because they're just trawling hundreds and thousands of kilometers of ocean, getting all this data so they can put together a grid referenced map of what the Indian Ocean actually looks like. Once you've got that map, then you've got that power to send your submarines in. Then you know where you can send your submarines. Then you know the shortest distance between 2 points of ocean, for your submarines. You can judge where things are so deep that you can send your submarines safely for a longer period of time. These are really important as far as submarine warfare is concerned. And I would say, sadly, unlike India, which is still to completely immerse itself in submarine warfare, the Chinese have done it. They've understood that the future of the current, the past, the future of naval warfare has to be as far as submarines are concerned. It can't be with aircraft carriers.
Yeah. Lovely. I mean, I think that's, Anna, please cut that, because I think that's a crash course for anybody who wants to understand what do these so-called spy, or like Shiv said, it's a sort of a doobie name, but like, research vehicles, research ships do in the ocean. Coming to the part about, do we have them? And do we also do similar kind of research, or are we lagging behind on
So
that
we
part?
do. We've always had pretty powerful survey vessels. We definitely need more, but we do have our own hydrographic survey vessels which conduct the precise same kind of thing, Dave, that the Chinese do. The Chinese are just doing it much more aggressively and more surreptitiously. That's the problem. They're in your backyard doing it. It's like India sending survey vessels into the South China Sea. It's pretty much like that. Now there's one point that I wanted to add to what the Chinese do, which is that they may send these survey vessels to conduct hydrographic surveys. And let me say right at the outset that conducting these depth surveys and these hydrographic surveys is not illegal. They're allowed to do that. They're totally allowed to do that. The reason why all of this becomes problematic is, like I said, this is an unreliable and untrustworthy country, which means that these ships, which are presumably, or they are stated to be hydrographic survey vessels, also have sensors on board which are conducting electromagnetic espionage, which means they'll sail near the Andaman Islands and soak up electromagnetic intelligence about what the coastal radars are on the Indian side. They'll look at travel very close to the mainland or near Lakshadweep and find out whether there are any sensors there, what the Navy has over there, using other kinds of underwater sensors to see whether India has underwater sensors in some place. So apart from conducting this sort of innocuous mission of hydrographic survey and research, it's also kind of soaking up electromagnetic data, which is, communications, electric signals, radar bandwidths, things of a very strategic nature, which gives them a picture of how well defended are these islands, what kind of radars actually exist there. Those are the kinds of devious espionage related activities that these ships also do, which is the reason why India doesn't allow them near the islands.
That kind of makes me remember this one question and one thought I've had for a long time now, especially since I began hosting this podcast of Inner Defense. Uh, why does China do all of this? I mean, yeah, there are certain reasons for it to do it for its strategic ambitions vis-a-vis the US, etc., etc. But I'm talking purely in the context of India. We'll come back to the LSE in a bit, but whether it's the LSE or whether it's sending in spy ships that kind of spy on, like you said, coastal radars in the Andamans. There was, I think, an episode, I forgot when, a few months ago, when they sent us a so-called spy ship during a time when India was supposed to conduct a missile test because there is no time issued for that for those tests, and the test was actually postponed because Indians knew that the ship was there. क्या बस वो उंगली करना है उनको? Because I don't see is there a larger strategic objective is my question basically. Like with the Indian Ocean, like you argued, I get that point. But with India, I just do not get what China is doing, why it's doing, whether it's at the LSE or whether it's in the Andaman Ocean.
No, so it's definitely not just about Ungli. It's most definitely a strategic objective for China. Let's not make any mistake about that. And the reason is because in the region, China sees India as the only real threat. China sees India as an emerging power. India is everything that China is not, in good ways and bad. And therefore, China sees India, which is now close to the United States, etc., as a strategic, military, economic, and other cultural opponent. And therefore, they need to try and contain India. So there is something called the string of pearls strategy.
Yes.
The Chinese, I don't know who it was who gave it the name string of pearls, but it is basically an Indian Ocean strategy where China will try and create as many access points and bases of its own in the Indian Ocean to try and encircle India and kind of create strategic pressure on India. They've done it with Maldives. The Chinese have a base on Coco Island, which is operated by Myanmar, just north of the Andamans. They've tried for Gwadar in the Arabian Sea in Pakistan is a Chinese base. So this string of pearls strategy has kind of ebbed and flowed with varying degrees of success for many, many years. But let's make no mistake. This is about hegemony. China does not share power. They don't like sharing power. They don't like sharing who calls the shots. When we say two Asian giants, they hate that idea. They hate the idea of the tiger and the elephant. They're like, what nonsense is this? There's only the tiger. There's no elephant. So the tiger has to destroy the elephant. It has to debilitate the elephant. India cannot be seen to be anywhere close to an equal power. That's also the reason why China doesn't even speak about India in equal terms. They see themselves as on par with the United States rather than India, which may be a fair comparison in terms of what their objectives are. But in terms of strength, in terms of what China is trying to do, India is that kind of India is that counter force. That's the reason why the United States, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, all of these countries and continents see India as that kind of counterweight to China. Because of China's unchecked rise over so many decades, it is India that is keeping China in check. It's India that is that geographic as well as strategic kind of bulwark against China. And China sees that. That's the reason why they want control of the Indian Ocean. They hate the fact that India is so geographically located that it basically oversees the entire Indian Ocean, shipping lanes of communication, energy, the fuel lines of communication, etc. And it doesn't want that. It says that, China's strategic future is going to depend on China having leverage on trade lines, on the shipping lines of commerce. And if it doesn't have control over that, if a democracy like India, which is close to the United States, has control over those, then, we can't pull the levers. What's the point if we can't pull the levers of something that can actually cripple these countries, right? So that's the reason why China needs to be in the Indian Ocean. That's the reason why they need to be there.
Right. Very interesting. And we'll now move back to the land, to the LSE and what the current standoff is all about, but after a quick break.
Even though they don't tell me straight to my face, but I think I have faced the rejection based on where I come from quitting, like being a content creator because of all these challenges that
I myself has tried to quit like 3-4 times. I kind of recall back like why did I start? Like even if it's difficult, I think I should just go with it. Like I don't so that I don't regret later.
Is there any Indian designer you want to collaborate with in the future?
And Rahul Mishra, Gaurav Gupta, and Amit Agrawal.
Welcome back. We are talking about India's standoff with China, whether it's at the LSE or what's going on in the Indian Ocean, which has been kind of going on for a while now, actually. Because I remember reading about this even when I was growing up. But let's go back to the LSE for a bit. So the 20th round of the Corps Commander level meet post the standoff that began around 4 years ago, we'll finish 4 years in May this year, happened on 10th October. Actually, it happened between 9th and 10th October, according to the PIB press release, which tells me that it began on 9th and on 10th, which also tells me it went for a long time.
Yeah.
Before we get into the strategic and the diplomatic part of it, I want to actually get into what these meetings are all about, because while I was researching, I also fished out a very old photo of yours that you posted, I don't know how many years ago, but I think this was at a meeting.
2006.
Yes, this was at a meeting of 2006 where you were being nicely hugged by a Chinese soldier or an officer.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, holding a bottle of, let's not mention what, in your hand, with some packets of, again, let's not mention what, on the table. But one, what was it all about? Second, what are these meetings like?
So this was in 2006, and it's still one of my greatest memories, and we were really lucky to be able to do that. 2006 was not only a long time ago, but a very innocent time, where India and China were not at each other's throats, in this way at least. So this was in Arunachal Pradesh. This was that picture is actually taken in Tibet.
Okay.
But this was a place called Tawang, which everyone knows. Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh is now a pretty restive place between India and China. And this was a border meeting taking place between Indian and Chinese, an Indian and a Chinese unit, which was in a place called Bumla, which is right on the Indo-Tibetan border. So that picture is taken inside the Chinese tent, which is about 4 kilometers into the Tibetan side.
Okay.
So we'd gotten into their trucks and we'd gone over. And after basically at these meetings, I don't know if those it happens the same way now, but in those days, in 2006, 2007, these meetings were pretty formalities, right? They would get together over in a conference room. They would exchange information about any violations or any patrols staying too long, etc., and all done in a very genial, kind of jovial atmosphere. And once that was done, they would, both sides would go to this large officer's tent, this kind of mess tent, and then the alcohol would flow, and gifts would be exchanged, and food would be eaten, and there would be about 2-3 hours of merrymaking, and everyone would hug each other, and then they would leave. Difficult to imagine that kind of thing happening right now, because they're too busy beating the hell out of each other, right? But at that time, that's exactly what happened, and it was a rare, wonderful experience, and that was the Chinese officer hugging me in that picture, and it was amazing. But coming to the kind of India-China border meetings that are taking place now, especially in light of what's happened in Eastern Ladakh, they happen in Chushul, and I've actually been to that border hut.
Okay.
It's a beautiful place, of course. This is a pretty a very desolate part of Ladakh. It's in a flat land called the Spangor Gap where this takes place, and these meetings, like you said, tend to be quite complicated and long. I can tell you, of these 20 meetings, some have been very, very short also.
Okay.
Because tempers have been extremely high. There hasn't been much to exchange because there's been no, movement since the previous meeting. And therefore, the two sides would meet for about half an hour, kind of yell at each other, exchange some information, and then depart. And there have been meetings that have gone on for like 14, 15, 16 hours, with a meal in between and stuff. So now, a lot of people, I wanted to say something about these meetings, Dave. A lot of people say, what's the point of these meetings?
Yeah.
What the hell is the point of 20 rounds of meetings if nothing is changing? Let me just say that the very fact that the two sides still have meetings is a good thing. That's a victory in itself, because if two countries with the ability to destroy the world and who are actually massed against each other in Eastern Ladakh stop talking, that's a reason to start worrying, because when communication stops, that's when the
Fighting begins.
mistakes can
Maybe.
happen. That's when mistakes can happen. That's when information can go wrong. That's when people can, either side can misjudge the activities of the other side. Wrong calls can be taken, and these can easily trigger either conflict or war. So it's a good thing that the two sides are talking. I can imagine the public view that it's kind of frustrating that after 20 rounds of talks, what are you achieving? But I can tell you at the tactical level, which is tactical is the opposite of strategic, at the very small unit level, things have been changing fairly steadily. Okay. There have been troop pullbacks from all the friction points. There have been disengagements in terms of troops moving back to create no man's land, buffer zones in most of those places where the actual confrontations were taking place, to such an extent that now, and remember the first point I made there, which is that nothing has changed on the ground in terms of China being at your doorstep in Eastern Ladakh. They're still there in huge numbers. But the actual friction points where the confrontations could have taken place, they've moved back from there. Both sides have moved back from there. So there's no immediate, possibility of a huge conflagration. Having said that, there are two historic areas of dispute between India and China which still continue to exist as problems. And these predate the May 2020 escalation. And these are the Depsang plains in the north part of Ladakh and the Demchok area in the south part of Ladakh. There was a video that was put out recently by the Congress party showing some shepherds being confronted by Chinese soldiers and that kind of thing. Now that's a very, very common occurrence in the Demchok area, which is in South Ladakh, because southeastern Ladakh, because like I said, the line of actual control, disputed areas, they cover large swaths of territory. It's not one line beyond which it's theirs and beyond which it's ours. It's not like that. Those perception differences do create these things, and the Chinese have been known to be try to create facts on the ground. They'll try and come and scare your people. They'll throw their wrappers here and there. They'll leave their equipment here and there. So see, because our equipment is here because we stay here. We operate from here. We live here. So that is standard operating procedure for the Chinese. That's the kind of thing that they actually do, to get it. But as far as these meetings between the Indian and Chinese side actually resulting in things becoming a little bit more stable, they've definitely done their job.
Okay. Very good insight, actually, because, what you mentioned, a lot of people do question what's the point of these, because when you see the statements that come after these meetings, they're very boilerplate. There's nothing new about it. Like, both sides agreed to, kind of
cordial
follow.
atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly. But you mentioned one point about tactical level engagement, and I just want to go to a bit of a segue. If you remember, there was this video that went viral, I think around 2.5 years ago, of a confrontation between Indian troops and Chinese troops, where I think the major who was leading the contingent was being pushed, and I think the viral moment actually was one of the Jawans of the Indian side saying something on the lines of Golgappa.
Yeah. That was in Sikkim.
Yeah. That video went viral. But watching that as a layperson, I actually got very angry. I thought that if I was being pushed around like that, I would have definitely thrown a punch.
Yeah.
And that punch would have led to something else, and then something else, and then something else, and basic escalation. So, if you've spoken to younger officers, Jawans on the ground, how do they manage such confrontations? Because honestly, that video was quite infuriating. On both sides,
That's a very good question, and I actually have spoken to several young officers, including officers who were not only involved in the fight that you're talking about in Sikkim, but also the famous fight on the banks of the Pangong Lake.
Oh, that one,
which involved the Kumaon regiment. So I've spoken to officers and soldiers of all of those famous viral videos, and it seems like a trivial thing to say, but look, these are men who are conducting sensitive patrols on hostile or semi-hostile territory. They are trained to hold their peace until absolutely provoked. These are high altitude areas. It's cold. There's drudgery. It's a desolate hellscape of a place to operate in for months or years together. So these are men who are obviously very, very well trained, and these are men who are trained in lethal damage. They have access to weapons. They've got access to their own training and their own bodies, and they can hurt you if they want to, and the other side can too, right? So when such confrontations happen, believe me when I say that most certainly Indian soldiers, and I imagine, I'm not trying to put down Chinese soldiers. I'm sure they're trained in the same manner, which is that try not to let this escalate. Try not to let that first punch go. Try not to, let anything happen that can be interpreted as an act of belligerence, because once that chain reaction of aggression starts, it's not going to end as a parking lot brawl like at a Gurgaon nightclub. It's going to end with both sides going back to their camps, coming back with weapons possibly, and blood flowing in the snow. Okay, that can easily happen. So therefore, the kind of restraint that these guys need to have to not let things escalate is Huge. Now, each and every time, and and I'm not saying this because I'm Indian, but because I've seen the reports, I've seen the videos, I've spoken to the people, I can tell that each and every time that such a fight has happened, the provocation has always come from the Chinese side.
Okay.
The provocations can come in three ways. They've come into your territory and are refusing to go back. Now, if 50 Chinese soldiers come into your camp and refuse to go back, are you going to sit there and let them sit there, or are you going to, let a few punches fly, right? A, that. B, when patrols cross each other, shouting slogans at each other, waving flags at each other, that whole war display and battle display and machismo is all totally normal. But if someone throws a rock, then you've got a problem. Galwan, by the way, the entire Galwan clash started because someone threw a rock. One rock was thrown and it hit Colonel Santosh Babu, the commanding officer of 16 Bihar, and that's what led to that huge bloodletting that took place. So, which is why I'm saying that one punch, one guy loses his cool, one guy decides to pick up a rock and throw it at the other, and these are humans. These are young men. Young red-blooded men with tempers and anger and hormones and, machismo and wanting to settle scores and are trained to see that the other side as their rivals, as their enemy, and the guys who are trying to kill them and who are living and breathing on the other side of that mountain, wanting to see their demise. So their blood is always up anyway. So imagine, it's easy to throw a punch, it's easy to fight, it's easy to get bashed up, it's easy to go into a brawl. It's 100 times more difficult to have a confrontation where a punch is not thrown at all. So these are difficult situations, and I can tell you that each and every one of the times that these have happened, sensible, mature Indian soldiers and officers have calmed the situation, sent the Chinese back, and it's not like Pyar se sent them back. They thrashed them and sent them back, like in the Tawang video or the Sikkim video.
Yes.
They're beaten black and blue and thrown out. But spoken to, also said, if you try this again, this is what will happen to you. So don't try this again. So that's what these videos are about.
In fact, in one of the videos, you can actually see after the thrashing,
you can
some
see them
soldiers
talking to
actually
them.
came, Shanti, bas ho gaya. Bhej diya unko,
That's it.
ab dur ho jao.
Correct. You've thrown your punches, we've thrown our punches. I've got broken teeth, you've got broken teeth. Now please go.
Yeah. Right. So coming back to the standoff itself as we end this episode, two things. One, how did we get here, but I want your perspective of how the Indian establishment's response towards China has evolved in the last, let's say, 15 years, so to speak. Because I'll tell you why I'm asking this. When I was growing up, Pakistan was all the game, okay? Yeah. Pakistan was always the big news. Pakistan was the number one enemy, etc. Yet there was this very undercurrent of retired generals talking about how India should be focusing more on China. Today, it's been a year and a half, I've been hosting this podcast now. It's all about China now.
Yeah.
So from Pakistan to China, how did the establishments, I'm saying establishment by the way, I'm not saying just the military, because I think the military has been aware for a while now that China is actually
The
the
real
threat,
adversary.
the threat to focus on. But the government's response changed. And second, the big question, I don't know if there's an answer to that, where do you see this going forward? Because it's been 4 years now. What's going to happen?
You're absolutely right. There's been a kind of systemic shift away from Pakistan. Even during all my early years as a defense correspondent, it has been mostly about Pakistan, very little about China. That has changed dramatically in, say, the last 10, 12 years. Now, the hyphenation that India has had, the obsession with Pakistan, the whole the historic context with Pakistan because of partition, etc., has meant that it was difficult for India to look away from Pakistan. And let's remember that you fought one war with China, but you fought 4 wars with Pakistan. So it's understandable that India has seen historically Pakistan as its main adversary. Now, starting from the early 90s, this slowly began to change because India, after post-liberalization, had taken on a very, very different path. It had, its inner animal instincts, as it were being realized. It was becoming an economic powerhouse. It had this massive diaspora that was going out there. This was a country that, was coming into its own in terms of a big modern military. And therefore, there was this, to put it very simply, a rapid realization that, what are we doing obsessing with these tuchas, like Pakistan? They're going to be poking us with, terrorism and stuff. But the possibility of a big war is not there with Pakistan anymore. Kargil, of course, changed that perception, and put India on guard. But India's basic perception that a war with Pakistan again is unlikely has largely held true, apart from Operation Parakram, when we almost came to a war. The reason for this also is because because Pakistan has been kind of eaten inside out by its own contradictions, its own nonsense, which has snowballed into what we're seeing right now. Pakistan has elections going on right now, which is one of the biggest jokes, really. I mean, the world is laughing. Even Pakistanis are laughing about this election, right? But it's a serious business, because this is a country that's right next to us. Whoever's going to lead, whether it's Nawaz Sharif with the blessings of the Pakistan army, means that, there are many who believe that if that is actually what happens in Pakistan, it could be the first real shot at peace between India and Pakistan, because Nawaz Sharif wants his name in the history books in terms of being a peace winner with India, etc. All that is fine, but it's become a kind of sideshow as far as India's strategic vision is concerned, because now we see that we are in the big league. India was always in the big league. It was just a question of a mindset change. Once India realized, I think in the 90s, post-liberalization, that we aren't just some random third world country. We're not among the rest. We are not only a first among equals in Asia, but we are a country that the rest of the world is going to be looking at and depending on for what goes on in this part of the world. And because China is exactly the opposite of us, that kind of responsibility is going to be us in a greater way. And that brings me to what you said, which is, Dave, that India rapidly realized that it isn't Pakistan, which is imploding in front of our eyes. It's China. And China wants our ocean. They want our territory. They want our states. They want Arunachal Pradesh. They want Ladakh. They want everything. So the military aspect of it became very, very real starting from the early 2000s. We'd already fought a huge war, a humiliating war with China in 1962. So it's not like India did not see China as a strategic threat. That would be very silly to say. India has always seen China as a strategic threat. But what you said is really right, which is systemically there was this hyphenation with Pakistan. It was always India-Pakistan. Even the world saw it as India-Pakistan. These two countries couldn't be separated from each other. Now, for the last 15, 20 years, that hyphenation is completely evaporated. And now it's about India and China, or China versus India. And that has taken a long time to, become a real thing. Even in some of the smallest things, we see the remnants of the lack of strategic vision as far as China is concerned. Once this standoff began in eastern Ladakh, You saw how the military went scrambling for emergency
Yes.
procurements of this, that,
Of rifles, for example.
rifles, high altitude equipment, mountaineering equipment, special shoes, special drones,
tanks,
ye
I
wo,
think.
light mountain tanks. Ridiculous. I mean, are you really saying that you were not prepared for a Himalayan conflict with a country like China? So these are all reminders and kind of alarming indicators that in many ways India has not kind of embraced its new strategic reality as far as China is concerned, and hopefully that will change. But a country like India, it takes more than a generation for things to change in terms of vision, in terms of the system. So we'll have to see where that goes. To answer your question about where this is headed now, and we've said this once before on this program, on this podcast, which is that the militaries of both sides have done what they needed to do. The only thing they can do now is destroy each other and destroy both countries. And the good news, of course, is that neither side has the stomach for it. Neither side has the stomach for war. The world certainly doesn't have the stomach for war. And what would war actually achieve, right? So there's to put it very simply, the possibility of a confrontation between the two sides is extremely remote. Having said that, the fact that you've got two very well armed armies massed against each other in eastern Ladakh is not a good thing for India and China. It's not a good thing for the world either. It's dangerous because the world is going to see that as a kind of time bomb. It could go off at any time. Therefore, the path ahead has to be political. It has to be. It will need to be Modi, Xi Jinping, or a summit, or a diplomatic solution to the India-China thing. Probably a broader discussion on the border dispute. Because these little, small disengagements and stuff, they're not going to make much of a difference. We can tom-tom them and trumpet them saying, "Dekho, disengagement ho gaya hai, peace has returned." That's rubbish. They're still sitting there in big numbers. Let no one fool you about the Chinese threat having evaporated. It's still very much there, right at your doorstep. So the soldiers have done what they needed to do. They're literally guarding our frontiers. They've said that we've held our territory. Now the netas need to go and figure this out. So that's what's next.
Right. So I think, long story short, what Shiv is saying, that this now moves from an in our defense topic to a Gita's world topic, which is a podcast hosted by producer Anna with our colleague Gita Mohan, where they discuss diplomacy and world affairs. Because that's where the solution will be fought and not on defense, basically. Right, we'll end this there. But before we do that, one not point per se, but one of the things that you mentioned in your previous answer just struck me. We should once in an episode discuss about the fabled mountain core of the Indian Army, because you talked about right now just how I won't say unprepared completely, but kind of like grasping for straws when it came to the China threat. So we'll talk about the mountain core that was supposed to be set up, and something started and then I don't know what happened.
It's a great tale of
I think you'll have some nice details on that.
The mountain core will be a completely separate episode, I assure you, because it is symptomatic of all that is wrong with Indian military planning, the stamina it takes to actually see a good idea to the finish, the problems with not being optimal in how you deploy your forces and what you're actually planning for. So yeah, absolutely, I agree with you. Mountain core, maybe 2 episodes.
Right. So we'll do that very soon. And in case you want us to talk about anything else, just let us know. You can drop a comment if you're watching us on YouTube, and if you're listening to us on Apple Podcast or Spotify, do leave us a rating. We'd just love to hear from you. Thanks as always to our producer Anna Priyadarshini, and thanks Shiv. Great episode. Had a fun discussion. That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and do not cross any boundaries with your passport. Bye bye.